Recording in progress. Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Yes, okay. Good evening. My name's Lyle Baker. I'm the chair of the Councillor Danberg. We're also joined by other members of the council, Councillor Leary in the chamber.
Mr. Chair, are you still talking?
Say again?
I don't know if you're still talking, but online we can't, we heard you start to introduce yourself and then it all cut out.
Oh, everything got cut off? All right.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay. Well, let me just restart. I'm Lyle Baker, and this is a meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee, and we are joined by various members of the committee whom I was introducing. Let me just make sure in case the recording didn't capture that. We have Vice Chair John Oliver, Councillor Wright, we have Councillor Getz, Councillor Danberg, and Councillor Albright, all members of the committee. We're also joined in the chamber by Councillor Leary and Councillor Farrell, who are not members of the committee, but welcome. And then online, we're also joined by Councillor Krinsman, a member of the committee. I believe Councillor Block, not a member of the committee, but welcome. And also, I can't quite see. Councillor Lucas. And have I missed anybody, Madam Chair Clerk? I think that's it of the council members. Now, I would ask the Ms. Dane, who is the vice chair, to introduce the members of the planning board who are here to hear an item that's going to be part of our public hearing. Ms. Dane, welcome. And now I don't know if you can tell who is here, but I will.
Thank you. I can't see who's in the chamber, but I see that online Peter Derringer and Jennifer Malinsky are here from the planning board. Are there more in the room?
I think Mr. Doringer is here, and then in the chamber, Mr. Heath. You want to indicate?
Yeah, in the chamber is Ed Daly from the planning board
Ed
and
Daly.
Barney Heath as ex officio.
Okay, great.
And we've also been joined by representatives of the law and planning departments who are welcome, and we'll introduce them at appropriate times. So let me just explain how I expect to proceed as far as our committee work tonight. We have one item for a public hearing, which we will hear first, and there's a sign-up sheet for those of you who are in the chamber who are interested in that item, and that is on the rostrum. Also, after we conclude the public hearing on that item, assuming we do, we'll have a brief discussion about the item and then determine whether to continue the discussion later in the meeting or to act on whatever decision the committee would like to take tonight at that time. But the objective is to move as quickly as we can into the second item, which relates to the question that is involving the sustainability and energy use reporting, otherwise known as BERDO. That is not a public hearing, but a public comment opportunity. And we've arranged for presentations by both the Energy Commission and the Chamber of Commerce. And then there is also a sign-up sheet there for those who wish to participate in that. The general format, except for those two more lengthy presentations for BERDO, are 3 minutes at the most. And then we also are welcoming any material in writing. I'd ask members who are here, or the public who are here to testify, to please keep that in mind, and then we will try and move the discussion along. Then we have some items to act on after those public opportunities to speak. And we may take a break at some point just so that everybody can keep moving along in an efficient and effective manner. So that's how I propose to proceed. Are there any questions from any members of the committee or other colleagues or the planning board? If not, then I would like to open the public hearing on item 7624, number 3, which is a discussion and possible amendments to change how building height is measured. And this is Zoning and Planning Committee requesting discussion and possible amendments to Chapter 30, zoning to require that building height is measured from original grade instead of finished grade. And I'd just like to point out for members of the public, as well as colleagues who I'm sure saw it, but just to remind you, there's a memorandum from the planning department going into the specifics of this change and the rationale for it that is in the Friday packet for all members of the council. I do believe we normally have a brief presentation of the item at the beginning so that the public will be informed, as well as members of the committee who know something about this already. So I'd like to turn it first over to the planning department, and then we will open the opportunity for public comment. Is that agreeable? Okay, so who's going to take it on for the department? All right. So please identify yourself for the record and then carry on.
Great. Hi, my name is Olivia James. I work in the planning department and I will be presenting about this. So let me share my screen. How do I get? So this is for the public hearing on the amendments on how we, changing how we building height is measured. So on our agenda, we will walk through the process that brought us to tonight's proposed amendment, including a review of previous ordinances, research on neighboring town ordinances, and examples from recent projects in Newton. So before 2009, the zoning ordinance required a special permit to change the existing grade anywhere on a site by more than 3 feet. The intention was to limit significant regrading. However, there were unintended consequences, such as needing a special permit in order to plant a tree. The 2007 zoning task force recommended that we eliminate this provision and replace it with a special permit for retaining walls over a certain height within the setback. So in 2009, City Council adopted an ordinance to require a special permit for a retaining wall over 4 feet within the setback. The goal was to limit the height of retaining walls to limit grade changes. However, this ordinance still did not prevent significant regrading. Retaining walls are often kept just under the 4-foot limit within the setback, and walls outside the setback are being built much higher than 4 feet. Around the same time, FAR reform was happening as well. So just a few months ago, City Council passed a new ordinance requiring a special permit for any retaining wall over 4 feet, regardless of location. This will provide discretionary review for any large wall. However, we still need amendments that tackle large grade changes. This brings us to tonight's public hearing on proposed amendments for changing how building height is measured. Currently, the average grade is calculated from the proposed or finished grade, which is then used to measure building height. This allows developers to manipulate the grade in order to maximize FAR, creating designs that don't fit the surrounding neighborhood. In the proposed amendments, the average grade would instead be calculated from the original existing grade or the proposed grade, whichever is lower. We believe this will result in designs that fit better in the community, while also maintaining options for developers to seek a special permit for third story or additional FAR. The sections of the ordinance we are proposing changes to will adjust the starting point for calculating average grade to the original grade. If we look at 145 Pine Ridge Road, we can see some of the issues we're hoping to address. The new development has lost most of the mature landscape, which can negatively impact stormwater. The roof line of the adjacent home on the left now comes up to the first floor of the new house. The proposed amendments would help address these issues. Staff has sought a variety of resources and conducted analyses in developing tonight's proposal. To begin, we've reviewed the ordinances of 7 nearby municipalities that use original grade to measure height. Generally, in built-out communities, Newton is the outlier for using finished grade. We did find a few less built-out communities like Lexington that used finished grade. However, we believe that for already built-out communities like Newton, new development and redevelopment should work within the existing context of a site and neighborhood. We also managed to talk to all those communities we identified except for Waltham to understand what their experience has been. We found that many chose to use original grade to address similar issues that Newton is tackling, such as grade manipulation, the mansionization of houses, and tear downs. When we asked if the ordinance has created significant issues over property values, which is something that we heard in the last ZAP meeting, no municipality could recall this issue coming up. Since our May meeting with ZAP, we've met with architects and builders to hear their perspective. They're generally in support of the proposed amendment, but would like to see more research and for us to think more about the impact it would have on small or steeply sloped sites. When we looked back through that group of ordinances from other municipalities, we found that issue of steep slopes were mostly accounted for by using the original grade. We recognize that the proposed amendments may make significant grade changes difficult. However, we believe this will result in designs that better fit the surrounding context, and developers still have the option of seeking a special permit. We've also reviewed plans from recent developments in Newton based on suggestions from people who have close contact with the process, such as ISD, architects, and current planning staff. Based on the projects we looked at, we found that most would still have by right pathways with similar square footage. It just may require a modified design or a special permit. So now we can look at a few more examples. While the new home at 11 Ruane Road is naturally taller since it's a 2.5-story home, replacing a single-story ranch, the alteration of the grade of 4 feet higher than what was there before makes it even more imposing. The retaining walls surrounding the property are all under 4 feet, which shows how the April amendment on retaining walls would still not be enough to address the regrading on this and other properties. The difference in the original grade elevation and the finished grade is 4 feet, and the proposed basement's midpoint is above the original elevation, meaning under the amendments we're discussing tonight, the proposed basement would have counted as a full story. After this presentation to ZAP in May, we looked a little closer at this project and found the retaining walls could likely be 1 or 2 feet high, as opposed to 3 feet, while still getting the basement out of the water. Our stormwater ordinance only requires 1 foot between the bottom of the basement and the water table. And this property's basement is 3 feet above the water table. So this adjustment would have likely allowed this house to be built exactly as it is, but 1 or 2 feet deeper in the ground. On Princeton Street, we found a similar instance where the midline of the proposed basement would have been higher than the original grade, meaning the basement would have counted as a full story. In this case, developers would have had to either redesign or get a special permit. And then looking back at 145 Pine Ridge Road, we can see how the previous amendment on retaining walls would work in tandem with the proposed amendments tonight. The new house clearly has retaining walls over 4 feet within the setback, which would now require a special permit. In addition, the amendments we are discussing tonight would require more of the basement to count toward FAR, which therefore would have required this design to be changed or for them to seek a special permit. So now we'll look at the proposed amendment. We're including the existing language just so that we have it. And if you'd like to see the red line text, that is in the ZAP memo with the proposed changes. So in the proposed amendment, we suggest updating the definition of grade to original grade based on different criteria for 3 types of lots in sections A, B, and C. In section 1.5.4F, we specify that the average grade should be based on the original or proposed, whichever is lower. It's important to understand that the formula is not changing, just the starting point is changing. And then in 1.5.5D, we inserted original grade in defining the formula. So after tonight's, we're gonna be opening the public hearing tonight, and based on any suggestions from Zach and the public, we would incorporate that into proposed amendments. And then we are proposing an effective date for January 2025.
Thank you. Before we proceed to the public comment, are there any questions from counselors before we start? Counselor Wright?
Thank you, Chair Baker. How long have the other towns used this approach that we're not using? You looked at neighboring towns?
Sure, sorry about that. It ranges. Watertown changed their definition fairly recently. And others have updated also within the last decade or so, and then some, it's been on the books for longer.
Okay, so this isn't, these other towns have been using it for many years, so this isn't like a quick change. And we're an outlier from these other neighboring towns.
Yeah, with towns that are similarly dense, like Newton, we are the outlier.
Okay. What was meant by Bedford, when they were talking about the grade manipulation? Why did they, state tear downs? Why did they think, I assume they say that it reduced tear downs, but why did they assume that?
I think it has to do with what counts towards FAR. So similar to us, if you can manipulate the grade and have lots of additional space that doesn't count towards FAR, then the site in effect has a much higher square footage allowance and a much more, a greater potential for sale.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Counselor Getz and then Counselor Albright. And then I want to move to the public if you can, just to get these points out. Yep. You can use your mic. Thank you.
My questions are specific to the ordinance language. In the first part, in 1.5.4.e A, it was stipulated that the window would be in effect from September 1st, 2024 and within 5 years. So why did that 5-year window, why was it defined as 5 years?
Well, I'll also just say September 1st was the original recommended effective date, so we should update that to January 1st, given the recommendation. But I can let maybe Attorney Lee speak to the recommendation for looking back within 5 years.
Mr. Lee, would you want to amplify the answer to that?
It's fairly straightforward, Mr. Chair. So after talking to planning and inspectional services, there was concern that if there wasn't a look back period with regards to changes of grade, then somebody who owned a property or a developer could change the grade in a given year, which wouldn't require any real permit except maybe a stormwater permit. And then just a year or two later, say that that's the existing grade and still be able to build exactly what they could do now, just if they were able to manipulate when they decided to do the grade changes. Having that 5-year look back period has so that whenever the development is going to happen, you look back at what changes of grade were made in the last 5 years, so no one can really game the system.
Okay, is that clear?
Okay.
Okay,
Right,
I'm sorry.
No, I have other questions. Can I just get
Some of these we can save for the working session if you want.
That's what I was actually
Okay,
thinking.
I'd like to
Yes.
just make, these are questions for clarification. If you
Yep.
have. Counselor Albright? Again.
If you prefer, Chair, I can wait and make my comments, questions during working session.
If that's all right, because I
That's
would
fine
like.
with me.
Okay. Anyone else? Any online counselors? Have I got missing anybody? And Ms. Norton will tell me if I miss a hand because I'm looking over here at the gadget. All right. I would now like to open the public hearing on this item, and I believe there's a list. Have you got a list of folks, or no one signed up yet? Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Okay, we have people online. So Ms. Norton, can you give me some help on making sure that I recognize people, how they would be on the right? Sorry, this is, I'm used to a screen. It's a little closer to me. I changed my glasses. Next.
I apologize to interrupt, but do we need to open it up as a joint hearing with the planning board or just as a?
Yes, that's
question?
correct. So Ms.
order.
Dane, you're correct. Would you like to do that?
Yes, I'm not even sure how I do that. Are we, is, opening this up as a planning board hearing?
So
So,
Okay,
you need a vote for that? We don't need.
Okay.
Okay,
is there, can I have a vote for that? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, and Ed in the room. Okay, and Lee is here too. Okay, the public hearing is open for the planning board.
thank you. So let me proceed then to those online, and I believe that the order I see them on the screen is the order that the hands appeared. Is that correct? Okay. Okay. Ellen Kay, would you identify yourself for the record? And you have 3 minutes. The timer, Mrs. Norton will start that, but please identify yourself for the record by name and your residence, if you would, please. Thank you. You need to unmute yourself. There you
Yes,
go.
thank you. I just did. My name is Ellen Katz, and I live at 31 William Street in Newton Upper Falls. I am a registered architect, and I am serving my 3rd term on Newton's Conservation Commission, but the views expressed here are my own. I am in favor of the proposal requiring that building height be measured from the original grade. However, it is not enough. Measuring building height differently does not directly address the fact that the natural topography of Newton is under attack by developers. Some municipalities, such as Wayland, have instituted limits on how many cubic yards of earth can be removed or added. These are so-called earth-moving ordinances or bylaws. In Newton, an earth-moving ordinance would be a direct way to insist that developers learn to work with Newton's natural contours. On the Conservation Commission, we are responsible for administering the State Wetlands Protection Act and the city's floodplain ordinance. We have jurisdiction over projects within 200 feet of open streams and other wetlands in the city. In this work, I've seen that many developers propose retaining walls so they can build on level lots drastically altered from the natural grade. These projects create new land contours that alter the flow of stormwater in Newton in new and unpredictable ways. Why should Newton care about land contours? All of Newton is a watershed for the Charles River. Natural contours allow the water to reach the smaller streams, which in turn feed the river. Many streams in Newton were channelized or otherwise altered in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The watercourses no longer function well. I'm sure some people on this call have experienced destructive flooding in Newton, and that is becoming more intense with climate change. We are now amplifying these errors by allowing radical changes to land contours with potential devastating impacts. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying within the time. So Ms. Norton will promote the next person, and that is Jay Walter. Mr. Walter, would you please identify yourself for the record by name and address? With him?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Now we can. That's great. Are
Thank
you,
you.
you
Sorry.
wish to be visible? You're welcome to be visible too.
Oh, okay, sure. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jay Walter, and I live at 83 Pembroke Street. Basically, I'm in favor of the proposal with reservation. And my reservation is this, that I don't think a full proper analysis has been made of the potential issues that are that may arise from this ordinance. I'm distressed by the added verbiage about natural grade or the lesser lower grade. I'm not sure what the implications of that are. Intuitively, I think this would work, but I don't think I should be depending on my intuition, nor do I think the council should be depending on intuition. We should have a more thorough analysis. That amendment with or lower has implications with sites, I think specifically that slope down to the street. And I would really like to see a more thorough analysis of the implications of that, We just got through a comprehensive zoning reform, and it didn't really reform our existing zoning at all. It just added overlays. So our existing zoning still has layers and layers of these kind of amendments on them that are contradictory and complicated. And I would urge the council and this committee to take your time with these proposals and more thoroughly investigate the potential results of these, because I'm not convinced that we really know what this proposal will actually do. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, and I just point out for those who are have asked to speak or are being promoted, there's a short delay in the technical side of things in order for you to be a panelist. And say again. The next speaker is Terry Sorrow. And would you again please identify yourself with the name and for your address for the record?
Terry Sorrow, 44 Cook Street, Newton, Mass. I think I am in, I approve this proposal as far as the heights and what I've heard and read. And I don't want to speak too much on this, but all I can say is we just had an issue of such here at 20 Clinton Street. And I would hope that this panel and anyone that is going to look at this proposal and drive by 20 Clinton Street and see exactly what happened to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker will be it's Monahan, Lisa Monahan. And again, please bear with the short delay.
Hi there. Thanks very much for, hold on one second.
Would you give your address to Ms. Monahan? I'm sorry.
1105 Walnut Street in Newton Highlands. I'm an architect, and I have to say that I really appreciate the comments of Ellen Katz earlier, and the whole idea of somehow developing an ordinance that will capture, amount of earth moved. So far, I haven't heard any discussion about that. Our zoning code is extremely complicated, and it has been built up over decades by incremental changes. And taking this approach is very short-sighted, and there is no, immediate urgent issue to get this passed in the next month or this summer. I think the city should take advantage of the strength of the planning department and community members that have experience, people on the board, on the ZAP committee and the council that have experience, and study this like it deserves to be studied. This item alone may, in fact, be beneficial There, as Jay was saying, there was new language that we heard tonight. I have no idea what kind of difference that will make. It's dangerous to look at site planning ordinances in this manner incrementally. They should be studied holistically and see how the different parts and pieces affect each other. So I would urge you to assemble a team to look at this and study it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Dan Powdermaker is the next speaker. So Powdermaker, just again, when you come online, please identify yourself with your name and address.
Okay. Good evening. Hi. I am Dan Powdermaker, and I live at 119 Lincoln Street in Newton Highlands. I've been in Newton for, well, more than 50 years. I have experience with the current zoning code through, I guess what you would call a second, it's not really a career, but a pastime where I have converted and rehabbed a number of houses, single families and two families in Newton. When I say a number, I don't know, 15 or 20, including the one I live in. And I think some of the members of this council are aware of some of those projects that we've done. I am neither in favor or against this proposal, but I urge the committee to reject it at this point. I think as I believe Lisa Monahan said, and Jay Walter, careful and comprehensive analysis of the impacts and consequences of change should be made. It should be provided to the public and to the council members. And if we look at what's happened, slide 1 of this evening's presentation showed a 15-year history of incremental zoning changes not leading to the intended consequences. So that's a very good example of the risks of doing things without the careful and comprehensive analysis. The second example I'll give you was shown last month at the when this proposal was put forward, and that's the project, the two-family house between Chase and Brayland in Newton Center. And the mass of that property is necessitated, if you're going to build a two-family like that, by an artifact of our current zoning code that deals with roof lines, that most developers cannot explain why that's beneficial. They adhere to it. It increases the mass. It has other unintended consequences. So I urge you to take a look holistically and carefully before you start sticking more changes into a very, very complicated zoning plan. The second thing I'll say, I don't take solace from the fact that Needham or other towns use a particular way to measure grade. Grade is but one variable in determining building height. And Needham has many of the same issues and frustrations that Newton has, despite the fact that they have this different way of measuring things. So I think it would behoove everybody to look at things more holistically. A couple more points. My real concern, is the impact.
You only have 16 seconds, Mr. Powdermaker.
Impact on multifamily units. I think it's going to reduce the opportunity to convert some of these. The last thing I'll end on is, if you're going to implement this January of 2025, you are going to impact people that have bought properties and are planning to do certain things with them. I didn't realize it was as short a period and I apologize for going 10 seconds over. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Powdermaker. Who else is up next? Anthony Lee, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mr. Lee, yes, thank you. Give your name
Hi.
and address. Yeah.
Sure, my name's Anthony Lee. I'm a Newton homeowner. I live at 35 Village Circle.
Where do you
I'd like
live?
to urge 35 Village Circle.
Thank you.
I'd like to urge the council and the committee to please take the time to ensure that they make thoughtful and precise changes to the building code that specifically address the intended problem of pedestal houses. I'm currently working on developing my house, and for example, the last set of changes that will pass very quickly pertaining to retaining walls affect my property. I am not trying to build a pedestal house. The first floor of my house will not move by more than a couple of inches. But I live at the bottom of a hill. It's 15 feet from the street to the back of my property. And with the changes that went through, now I have to go through special committee in order to build a retaining wall behind my house that is not visible from the street. So all of the, problems that this was trying to solve, my house is not one of those problematic houses, and yet now this is adding several months to my, my timeline. With the current proposed language that's being discussed today, it will also, penalize a design that, again, doesn't have to do with pedestal houses. I'm trying to build a driveway that goes to the first floor instead of the current driveway that goes to the basement in order to create a house that is accessible for my parents and in-laws. And with the current language, there's going to be a penalty for trying to develop a house that is just accessible. And the reason why is because just like a small part of the house, just the garage was exposed to the basement previously. And so I guess in summary, as a Newton homeowner, it feels a bit like we're a bit like collateral damage between, the city and developers. And I'd like to ask that you take the time to really, the council, to really take the time to make sure that you do the proper analysis to ensure that, this, the changes that you enact have the intended consequences without, negatively affecting the houses that are not, that don't have that problem.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone else, Ms. Gordon? All right. Kim Feinstein, I believe. Again, would you, when you come online, just state your name and address again.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tim Feinstein. I reside at 49 Washburn Avenue in Auburndale. I'm a homeowner who recently learned about this proposal, and I would join others in urging to take the time in considering it. I am an existing homeowner. I'm not planning actually to do anything right now, but it seems to me that it's a restriction on height, which will in turn potentially restrict if I ever choose to raise my basement. My basement doesn't flood that much, but I know that we'll have with climate change more and more extreme situations. And I want to ensure that, the intent of this ordinance doesn't impact me, because I don't think that's what I'm not trying to do a pedestal house. Also, in general, I'd like to understand the impact on property prices, because if this makes houses less attractive to developers, then probably the housing prices would go down, and then also the city's tax revenue would be less, and we just experienced a pretty long school strike. So, and also, January 2025 timeline seems rushed to me as well. So I join others in urging to reject it in its current form, and take a little bit more time in considering all the options and the most narrow way to address those extra tall homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else, Ms. Norton? Okay. 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 All right. So that seems to be the conclusion of those who've asked to testify. I'd entertain a motion in the committee to close the public hearing in zoning and planning. Is there such a motion? Councilor Albright?
So may I ask, Mr. Chair, if we decided we wanted changes to the ordinance, would we want to leave the public hearing open, or do you want to close it and then perhaps open it again later?
I think we have the flexibility. I'd ask Mr. Lee if there are changes we wish to make to the ordinance that the advertisement is broad enough to allow us to modify what is proposed by the department if we so choose. Is that correct, Mr. Lee?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. We'd have to look at the exact proposed amendment to the draft, but there is wide latitude to make some changes based on the public hearing language.
Okay, so I'll move, if that's the case, then I'll move closing the public hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. Motion made by Councilor Albright to close the public hearing in zoning and planning. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The ayes have it. The public hearing is closed. Planning board?
Yep, is there a motion to close the public hearing for the planning board?
Mr. Chair, I abstain.
Uh,
One abstention.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilor Albright abstained. I didn't recognize that. Excuse me, not Albright. Danberg. Councilor Albright moved it. Councilor Danberg abstained. I don't mean to confuse you, but I was confused. So bear with it. Thank you. Planning board.
Okay.
Have the planning board.
Do I hear a second? Second. Okay, all ayes. Or, okay, any,
Ed is
Nate?
in favor and Director Heath abstains on this issue.
okay. And any nays? No. Okay, and so the planning board closes the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. So in committee, I want to just get a sense of the committee of where we are on the item in committee, because just for the public's information, we have a companion item which is intended to get into an extensive discussion of the issues that have been raised by what is referred to as pedestal houses. This specific amendment was brought forward by the planning department as a start on the path of responding to those issues in a comprehensive way, as several speakers have asked. And it is designed to be a first but not the last step in addressing the kinds of issues that have been discussed, including how Earth is moved and also what we respond. But right now, this is the item before the committee. Let me see what the sentiment of the committee. Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate many of the members of the public who spoke, especially Ellen Katz, who had brought up some interesting new issues that I hadn't even considered as a way to solve the problem. I don't think we have the proper analysis done yet to know whether we have a comprehensive solution or not. I know there's more to be done, but I also know that we have a history in this committee over the many, many years of making changes and that produce a bulge in another direction. I think the garage ordinance was a very good example of that, at how we passed an ordinance and suddenly we had all kinds of problems and had to come back at it with an amendment, which is totally possible, but that does disrupt a lot of people's lives. I know we have a problem on Clinton Street, and actually from the meeting that we had this afternoon, I think the problems are a little bit deeper than I even thought they were. What I don't think we have is a relationship between this ordinance, the grade ordinance, and FAR, which is really causing the problem with respect to basements in particular. We have a proposal that works well, perhaps on level sites, but as we all know, Newton has topography that's quite hilly. We have people who spoke about it. We have projects that go down a hill from the street and projects that go up a hill from the street. And I don't think we have the answer of how this particular ordinance affects them. We also don't know how it affects, we know more about how it affects single family houses. We don't know how it affects multifamily houses. And it certainly wouldn't have fixed the Braylon Chase problem, which, as Mr. Powdermaker referenced, has another whole issue related to roof lines and how they are described in our ordinance. So I think we're on the right track. We've made a good step. But I really think we need to study this a little bit more, and I'd be happy to, I raised a lot of the issues just now, and I think we need to take a little bit more time and study this issue a little bit closer.
Okay, thank you. Recognize Counselor Wright and then Counselor Danbury.
So I feel differently on this. This is something we can do more quickly compared to the other solutions. And the longer we wait, we'll get more houses like Clinton and other ones in the city. It's not saying, no, you can't do this. It's saying you can't do it by right, but you could do it by special permit. And if you do have a good architect, they can go in and they understand it, and typically in one meeting, it's done. This isn't going to solve everything, but it's a start, and I'd like us to move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Danbury.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair. I would like to express my agreement with Counselor Albright in this. I also feel that this is not something that we should do quickly. This is a very complicated issue. It may seem simple on the surface, but there are lots of implications for different types of topography. As has been mentioned before, sloping lots need to be treated differently than flat lots. I absolutely agree that pedestal houses on flat lots are something that we really want to do away with because we don't want to raise houses in neighborhoods that are taller than all of the other houses in the neighborhoods, and we need to find a solution to that. But if we move forward with this the way it is, we have not studied the implications for multifamily houses and especially for houses that are built on steep lots like the Chase Brayland. The Chase Brayland has 15 to 18 feet between Chase and Brayland, and lots like that we need to look at the implications of what's going to happen to a lot like that. There is no reason that we need to move forward with this half-baked, and I do not consider this fully looked at. I think we need to study it more closely and make sure that we are not setting ourselves up for unintended consequences that we don't see tonight. So I will not be supporting this.
Okay, let me hear from Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just one quick clarification. In 154E.1.a, I guess it's the easiest way to put it. It says September 1st, but we know that that's not September 1st,
Yeah.
right? We're literally talking January 25.
January 1st is what the department
20
has superseded its recommendation from the text to give more time for people to understand how this will affect.
Great, thank you. And then I am sympathetic to the idea of additional study. I think I've said multiple times in different instances, hey, let's make sure we've covered our bases here. And that might lead me to, I might butcher the question itself, but I think the intent is pretty straightforward. And if I may, through you to the planning department here, we aren't making substantive, hey, Zach, I'll look higher. We're not making substantive changes to existing or lots with significant slopes, is my understanding of what we have in front of us here. We're really talking about when we measure grade. And what this is really saying is we're doing it before grade is changed. Confirm, deny? Help me out with that.
Mr. Lamel or others? Yeah.
Sorry about that. So the I think as Ms. James said in the presentation, the formula itself of how height is measured when a project comes forward isn't changing. It's the starting point that would be changing. And I think what I would add to that, and you're correct, is that each site, the formula of average grade does take into account the different topography of each individual site. A different ordinance, and in different communities this is done, and we put this in the memo, is that height is measured from a fixed point, like the back of a curb or the center line of the street. And in that instance, if a site slopes up drastically or slopes down drastically, the point of how height is measured is frozen, right? It's only the back of the curb. For the city of Newton and other places that use average grade, by definition, it's using the contours of the site and taking those into consideration of where that height is being measured from.
Correct. And then we're doing that before it is modified. Regraded.
That's the recommendation before
Right.
you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So let me just check with other members of the committee. Councilor Krinsman, do you have any view on this yet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm inclined to agree with the sentiments expressed by Councilors Albright and Danberg. I do, generally speaking, I think people say we're going too fast when they disagree with the substance of a proposal. I think in this case, there's actually some merit to doing a little bit more research, looking at some more properties and seeing what the impacts would be on the different types of houses that were articulated. So I'm inclined to agree with Albright and Danberg. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Getz, sorry. And I'll recognize Councilor Leary.
Okay, I actually wanted to get into the specifics of the ordinance language
Yeah.
that I originally was speaking
Right.
to in the beginning. I was curious because I wasn't sure, just even in terms of, I would really appreciate an example of working through the formula with the new parameters. Just because I think that when I went to it, I first noticed that the formula that's here doesn't match up with the formula that's in the current zoning. And so I assume that that formula will be the same formula, correct? It's just not, it's not presented the same way in the new language. The equation is not correct. And then when it went into defining, it's in the third bullet, it talked about E1 and E2 are the elevations of the finished ground level at the respective ends of each segment. So I was a little concerned with that, seemed like old language, in terms of the formula. But that's why I wanted an example, because I wanted to make sure that everything was correct in terms of the assumptions that I have in my head with the new definitions. And then lastly, I'm concurring with a few people that were talking about, like, I would like to see the Braceland Road example and how it would change what would be permitted on that lot with the one that was cited with that large retaining wall in the front. Because I think it would be helpful to, put into the field 3 or 4 examples. I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Anyone, let's see, Councilor Leary, non-member committee, but welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I am very interested in this. As been mentioned, there's been more than one issue coming up in Ward 1 where we've had unexpected height and massing. I will say that both of those projects are special permits. And I want to just make this committee aware that I think the land use is going to be much more careful going forward about grade changes. However, I'm well aware that there's a lot of by right projects where this is an issue with pedestal housing. I want to find out more about it. I want something like this to move through, but I am not quite sure we have all the information. My understanding that there is a working group that's going to be studying that. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Well, we've consulted with various architects and our architectural working group has consulted with the planning department, but they're different people who've given us advice from time to time. But this is a case where we have our department who consults with them as they have on this matter. And as my understanding, as they indicated that they generally supported it, but had some questions and reservations. So.
Oh, okay, and I would like to see, if possible, more examples from the other 7 communities in terms of how this turned out for them, what were some unexpected consequences for those communities. I think an example really helps, the impact on the stormwater ordinance and 21E sites as well, are my concerns.
Okay. Any other member of the council? Let me express my own views, and then we can see where we go. I'm concerned that this is a choice that is important to make if we can make it soon, simply because the more comprehensive ordinance revision are going to take some time. It's apparent from our work. But what we're trying to do is respond to the egregious circumstances that citizens point out to us, and from time to time, and ask, why did this occur? Do we not have any remedy at all? And the department has brought forth this remedy to us to consider. So I'm one of the people who would like to see it move forward, but I would like also to have enough support to make sure that we are successful at the full council. So let me see if the department has the capacity to take into account some of these comments and perhaps give us some examples of impact. Is that a possibility for our next conversation on this item?
We can look up more examples. I think there's a bunch in the presentation itself. I'm not really sure. Maybe counselors can email us about specifics that they're looking for, and then we can go from there. It's a bit open-ended at the moment.
We have some comments. I guess we have the question about how this would work on a 2-family house, a multifamily house, and a house that has a big difference between the front and the back grade. Is that fair? Is that a fair summary? I mean, you've given us some examples of situations already, but I want to be clear. If we're asking you to do more work, we want to be clear what we're asking you to do. Councilor Albright, excuse me, Planning Director.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion, Councilor Baker. I would request maybe some of the folks that spoke tonight to kind of crowdsource examples that they've thought of and provide them to the planning department. That's always helpful because we don't think of every single possibility, but there's some very bright people that spoke tonight that could maybe provide some examples of things where this would have some unintended consequences that would be helpful for the committee to see.
And I would just ask, as part of that, remember, we have an intended consequence too, which is to reduce the incidence of the kind of circumstance we saw earlier. Councilor Albright.
So I think Mr. Heath came up and then Mr. Lamel came up with the right suggestions to ask us to provide specific requests to the planning department for what we want to see analyzed. And therefore, I would like to move hold. I want to just make sure that we all pay attention to what Councilor Leary said. The 2 problems that we're experiencing right now in Ward 1 were both special permits. So that we had the opportunity to deal with it, but somehow it was lost in the process. So
I've got a docket item that may come to the council to specifically address the kind of information required as part of that work, which does not change the ordinance, but just says, let's understand what's going on.
So I'm going to move hold and hope that we can get back to this
Okay.
as soon as possible.
So we have a motion in the committee to hold. Let me see, all those in favor of holding will say aye.
Aye.
So let me just see, that's Councilor Krensman, Councilor Danberg, Councilor Getz, Councilor Albright. All those opposed? Okay. I will abstain as well. So the item is held, but I think we will work with the planning department to try and bring it back with some examples to clarify that. Have I missed anybody in the committee? And Ms. Dane, I think you have an opportunity to decide what to do with the item in your committee.
Before we leave the item, sir, Mr. Chair?
One, yes,
One quick question, or one request, I guess. When those questions are forwarded to planning, to be addressed or answered, can the entire committee be, shared on those communications or at least played back so we understand what's being studied?
Well, I want to try and avoid an open meeting problem, but we will forward them through the department and then string them back out to the committee, I think, in a formal way.
Fair enough.
Just to do it so we can do that properly. But we'll sort that out. Okay. Mr. Lamel, and thank you very much. And we are grateful to you for your presentations, and let's see where we go. But the planning board has to act.
Thank you, Chairman Baker. From the planning board, are there comments on this that people want to share now, or do I hear a motion to hold this issue to a future meeting? Peter Derringer?
Yes, well, I guess I've had trouble trying to envision what the additional research would be. I think there's some merit to the planning department's proposal to do some crowdsourcing of problems and to get back to us get back to us quickly with a more complete statement. I guess I feel quite strongly that we have to move quickly on this problem of the pedestal houses, and I would not be in favor of a long delay, because I think probably from what we've learned from other communities and what we can learn from our own so far, we know a lot about this problem, and I would not want to delay. So my proposal is to put it on hold until our next meeting.
Are there other comments?
This is Ed Daly in the chamber.
Yes.
I think recognizing that this was drafted as a stopgap, I would move it forward and adopt it.
So is that a motion to vote for it now today?
I think I'd like to hear from others, but that's what I would do if I had support.
And Lee Breckenridge.
I guess my feeling is the same as Peter Doringer's. As long as the city council committee is putting their analysis on hold, I think we should do the same. But I also have these concerns about the need to respond to a pretty egregious immediate problem with the ordinance as written. There is in the back of my mind the fact that there was a pre-existing ordinance that was replaced by the one that is currently in effect, that obviously was not adequately analyzed when it was enacted. It would be really helpful to me to understand exactly what went awry. There were problems with the previous ordinance, which had to do with measuring slope under different circumstances, as best I recall. It would help me if I could just have some clarification about what got lost and what got substituted when this current ordinance got put in place, because here, my conclusion is the same as Peter Doringer's. We've obviously created over the past few years a problem that needs curing rather quickly, as opposed to stringing it out.
Does the planning department have any comment on that, about what was lost in past revisions?
It's something we can look to provide in more detail. We did put a bit more in the memo that was in the packet this week, but we can provide a bit more and do a bit more analysis.
So just for information, the planning board, depending on what you decide, but my intention is to try and have the analysis, because we do not meet for a while, but we will meet in the summer to try and have some of this done by the next meeting of the committee, because I would like not to have this delayed if we can move it forward with sufficient analysis to command support from the council.
Jennifer?
Amy, I really don't have much to add to Lee and Peter's comments, but to say that I agree, I think there is urgency here, but I really am very sympathetic to this idea of the piecemeal reforms and the fact that this is one piece of the puzzle that creates the building shape that we see. And, you know, I'm recalling experience with the previous FAR reform in 2011 and how, you know, just having that discrete thing to work on, it makes it hard to get at the whole picture. But I do understand that that is, that's an endeavor and that will take time. And so, you know, to say, I think that's important, but I think if we wait for the next iteration of these analysis, that I'm comfortable with that for the planning board.
So do I hear a motion to hold this for the next meeting?
So moved.
Okay, and seconded. All that. Do I hear ayes?
Aye.
Ed Daly, yeah. Okay. And no abstentions, nays.
I'll abstain on this.
Okay, and so the planning board will hold this issue to the next meeting.
Thank you. And I appreciate the members of the planning board being here and allowing the discussion to go forward here because I know your time is limited. We will now move off of the formal zoning item into another item which is not part of the zoning ordinance. So your participation is welcome. You're welcome to stay, but it's not legally required because this is a discussion of an item that will ultimately result in, if it is concluded, in an ordinance that's non-zoning, but does have impact on how the buildings in the city are used. So please feel comfortable if you'd like to stick around. So we have a motion to hold in the committee, and I will confer with the planning department, but thank you, Ms. James. Thank you, Mr. Lamel. And we will go on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 4224, request for discussion and ordinance to require energy use reporting. And let me read the item into the record. Councilors Albright, Danberg, and Leary, on behalf of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy, requesting discussion and an ordinance that would require large property owners, campuses, and large commercial buildings to report energy use and associated greenhouse gas emissions annually to the City of Newton, to be used to encourage reductions in said energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in accordance and support of the goals set forth in the Newton Climate Action Plan. And we're joined by Mr. Ferguson tonight, and I've asked Mr. Ferguson if he would introduce the item in a brief form he has made a more extensive presentation to the committee, as you recall, and he has also provided an extensive set of materials which are attached to the agenda, which are available for the public and anyone to take a look at. But for purposes of the public input, what we wanted to do was to give him an opportunity to make a presentation that would involve an example so that people could understand how all of this might work in a specific property. And then that would set up an opportunity to hear from the Energy Commission, the Chamber of Commerce, and others who are interested in this topic. So if the committee's agreeable, that's how we will proceed. Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Ferguson, we're grateful to you for coming. Just want to make sure their mic is on. There we go.
Thank you. I'm Bill Ferguson. I'm co-director of sustainability for the City of Newton. I have a couple of notes to make and a comment, and then I'm going to explain this chart compliance pathway example, which Councilor Baker asked me to go over to help kick off the public testimony. So I will move as quickly as possible so our public does not have to wait any longer than necessary to make their comments. First of all, I want to note that we've been working with Newton Wellesley Hospital. We've been talking about Birdo for a while now. We met with them on May 30th, most recently. And we discussed some specifics about the ordinance and asked them to submit to us some specific language changes in the ordinance that they would like us to review. So that is in process with Newton Wellesley Hospital, and we appreciate their team working through this with us. The second point I'd like to make is that we have been working with Mr. Dante Capasso on a case study of one of his buildings. It's 181 Lexington Street. And I just want to confirm that we are still working together on that case study. We have a couple of more pieces of information that okay. We have a couple more pieces of information that we're trying to get to complete that case study, but it's still ongoing. I just want to mention that this Berto has been in process for a long time. The ordinance is the first action since the CAP. The Climate Action Plan was approved by the City Council 4.5 years ago, and it's the first to require emissions reductions in the city. There is a cost to building owners and the city to implement Berto, but there is a greater cost to do nothing. I want to just mention some data I uncovered from the website of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. In 2023, there were $92.9 billion in weather-related disasters. And of those, 19 were considered severe storm events, which totaled $54 billion in disasters, which was a new record for the costliest year on record for that peril. So those are the types of costs, and that's just in the United States. Those are the types of costs we're concerned about when we talk about global warming and why we're pursuing net zero and starting with Berto as our major building block for pursuing that Berto in the city of Newton. So what I would like to do is explain this compliance pathway example. This is an example of how buildings can comply with Berto through a phased decarbonization. This particular example is a 30,000 square foot office building. It was built in 1980. It's a 2-story. Uses natural gas for space heating and water heating. It needs a new roof by 2032. And in this case, it has separate heating and systems for the first and second floors. We can apply these concepts to any type of building, and I'm going to just review what steps are taken under this example to achieve net zero in this building. The blue line is the actual building emissions that the building is emitting, and the dotted line is the Berto standard as it exists in the proposed Berto ordinance. The goal is to keep the blue line underneath the dotted lines in order to stay in compliance. So in this case, the building is at 3 kilograms of CO2e per square foot. We'll just call it 3. That's the emissions rating of the building. The standard is 3.1. So in order to get below 3.1, an example of something that could be done in this building is an HVAC tune-up and controls for 11% savings. That decreases the emissions from the building slightly below the emission standard of 3.1, which is shown in that dotted line. Another step that can be taken is when the new roof is installed, a new roof is needed on this building, like on every building will eventually need a new roof. You can increase the insulation levels and obtain another 5% savings in the building. The third step shown on this is heat pump retrofit of the second floor, which will result in 40% savings and keep the building below the standard of 2.0, which is a requirement in 2040. And there's also an interim step that can be taken in 2039 to electrify the domestic hot water heating to get you slightly below the standard of 1.2. That's a requirement in 2040. And finally, the ultimate step is to install heat pumps to the rest of the building, to the first floor. And then the building is totally electrified and it's at zero emissions. So that's something that can happen over a period of 20, in this case, it's 20 years, and with 5 years to spare. So that's an example of decarbonization that can be applied to just about any building. And in the case of, for instance, a residential building, there's a lot more gas used for water heating. So you might do water heating, domestic hot water heating first, but these are the kinds of options that are available to any building to comply with BERDA. And that wraps up my explanation of this slide.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. And just to be clear, what you were pointing to, as I understand it, is a significant timeline, and then also the fact that a lot of these things occur at the time when replacements are naturally affected, although some are retrofit, like maybe heat pumps, but water heaters break down and get replaced, and so do other roofs and so forth. Again, I'm just trying to clarify your example, but is that accurate? Okay, thank you very much. So this is an opportunity now to hear from the Energy Commission as well as the Chamber, if they so desire. And we've done an unusual thing because they are putting together a panel presentation. I've invited the Chamber to spend up to 15 minutes. They don't have to spend that entire time, but they're welcome in the interest of energy conservation. If they want to use less, that's fine. But they have up to 15 minutes to explain their point of view on this proposed ordinance, and then we'll hear from the Chamber in like way, and then go to the sign-up sheet for public comment at 3-minute intervals. Okay, who is going to speak for the Commission? Ms. Brown. No, you can do it from right there, I believe, unless you have a presentation that you need to have on the slide deck. Yeah, okay, just we want to make sure that you're audible for the record. Ms. Norton will make sure.
Okay, it's on now.
And just please, even though you're speaking for the commission, just identify yourself by not only your role, but also your name and address in the city.
My name is Halina Brown. I want to thank Chairman Baker for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Energy Commission. I am a chair emerita of Newton Citizens Commission on Energy, for short, Energy Commission. And we have worked on BERDA since the fall of 21. And through the working group with the city sustainability team, 3 members of the Energy Commission and the sustainability team, we called ourselves Berda Working Group. We co-produced the draft of the ordinance as you see now. So since the issue of costs, and I mean capital costs and other costs of implementing Berda ordinance to the city and to the building owners and their tenants looms large in this debate, maybe I would like to address those first. So we started by our work by looking at Boston Berdo as a model. And we also learn a great deal from the experience of Boston and Cambridge, which also has a form of Berdo, they call it Budo. There are some differences. And this, I would like to stress, is our advantage in Newton. We can learn from others. We are not first movers. We are, to use the expression of my colleague, we are at the leading, not bleeding edge. And we work hard on trying to find a balance between costs and benefits. So here are some of the outcomes of our learning from these other 2 communities. By far, the largest number of questions from building owners in Boston pertain to calculating greenhouse gas emissions from electricity. It's tricky with electricity because there are different ways of counting credits for green electricity. In Newton, we eliminated this problem by excluding electricity from counting greenhouse gas emissions. End of that story. There are, of course, benefits to doing it that way, and I don't have time to go into them. Boston hired 6 additional staff members and allocated a few more from their existing staff to implement Berdo and to answer questions from building owners. That's substantial commitment of resources. Boston has 10 times as many buildings that qualify for Berdo ordinance as Newton, 10 times more. So Newton plans to do proportionally the same level of support by planning to hire 1 full staff member. So we are in the same ballpark as Boston in terms of committing resources to the implementation. We also will unabashedly be free riders on using the knowledge that Boston has acquired and their services for building owners to answer questions. We will take advantage of that as well. Boston and Cambridge also developed several extremely good websites which are available to all. So we really benefit from following their examples. We stretched our implementation schedule and made it less steep. We thought Boston was a little too steep in the first few years. And we also added 1 more year for implementation specifically for residential buildings in the range of between 20 and 50,000 square feet to give them more time for planning. Their first year of having to comply with Berdo is 2031. We're talking about 7 years from now. Until then, they can just prepare themselves. Now, we also conducted a case study. Mr. Ferguson mentioned that already. And while he is of the building at 181 Lexington Street, and while Mr. Ferguson prudently waits for all the pieces to come together before he speaks of it, I'll take a chance and say what the case study tells the Energy Commission as of now, with some caveats because it's not complete. But let me say something about generally estimating costs. Our goal is not to have the precise numbers. What our goal to do in doing a case study is to understand the scale of the challenge. What will happen to the rents for tenants who are occupying this building? What will happen to the building owner? What kind of level of challenge are we generating for him? You can never predict exactly the impact of regulations because regulations by their nature engender innovation. When there is a regulation coming up or already on the books, there are new innovative ideas, both in technology, in management, in financial mechanisms, and over time, the costs of the regulations fall down. So we can only do a picture in time right now to just, as I say, to get to the scale of it, okay? So we chose this building for several reasons. One of them was that Mr. Capasso, who is here and who is the owner of that building, expressed great concern about the impacts. Okay, we said, so let's try to answer Mr. Capasso's concerns, because he even envisioned a scenario where the rent in his units will go out by many hundreds of dollars, in his own words, a month, and he would force his tenants, some of his tenants out. Well, that's a serious problem, and we wanted to see how likely it would be. All right. We also, this building is from 1970. It was built when the building standards were very different than now, and when the energy was abundant and cheap and nobody worried about the waste of energy. Also, his rents are somewhere around $2,600 a month, somewhere in that vicinity, which by Newton standards counts as affordable to the workforce. So we want to protect these people to be able to live in Newton. And finally, it has only 30 units. So whatever you invest in retrofitting this building has to be borne out by only 30 units. Okay, so it's a very good sort of maybe worst case scenario, this building. And we considered 3 different scenarios. I don't know if I have time. Where am I with time right now? I'm halfway. Okay, so I will tell you this. There were 3 scenarios. One was the central hydronic heat pump. One was individual heat pumps for each unit. And one was do nothing, but choose alternative compliance path, paying for the emissions, all right? And when we look at, and these are our findings in a nutshell, right? In a nutshell. Number one, there are 2. Number one, the building will be in full compliance with BERDO as now proposed until 2038 while doing nothing. In other words, the way it is now, it will be in compliance until 38. It's plenty of time to plan. The second nutshell conclusion is that the way we estimate, and it's an estimate, is that the increase in rent will be somewhere in the range of between less than 1% and 5% increase in today's rent. Of course, rents will increase over time. So Mr. Capasso vigorously disputed these numbers. And when I spoke to him about 10 days ago, and saying we didn't consider the cost of electricity upgrade if such is needed, I totally agree, we didn't, because the only person who can get that number is Mr. Capasso. He has to approach Eversource to get that estimate. So that's number one. But neither did we consider the incentives that he might qualify for, which he is also in the best position to learn about. So we hope to continue working with this building owner to get these numbers. But so until then, everything is a speculation in terms of how much we upgrade in electricity cost and what the incentives will be. There are some other considerations in this building. My colleagues can speak to them better than I, but essentially, so the case will be refined, but the main point is this. We know enough at this point about the scale of the challenge in adopting BERDA ordinance, including the challenge for residential buildings with central heating, to go ahead with this ordinance. We feel enough confidence that we understand it sufficiently. Now, this brings me to my second point, and that is, how much time I have?
For 4 minutes.
Okay, I'll be done. The Fuller administration proposes to cut the ordinance in two. Everybody is familiar with that residential buildings will come a year later while keeping the same implementation schedule as now. Energy Commission strongly opposes this. It will do no good to anybody, but it will create problems. One of them is that the building owners will not plan. They will basically defer it, and they will have shorter time to meet the same deadlines as have been originally developed. Think about BERDO. It essentially has two points to BERDO. One is to reduce emissions, and one is to institutionalize planning for energy future in all the commercial buildings. All right, so it's about planning that we are talking when we talk about put these pieces back together and let's consider BERDO as one ordinance. This cutting it in two is a red herring. It's a distraction. People like Mr. Capasso is not going to relax anymore knowing that this particular building will be regulated a year down the road. So let's just not bother with this distraction. So essentially, I want to remind everybody that decarbonization on a strict schedule and reporting of energy use has the force of law in Commonwealth right now as we speak. What we are doing in Newton is taking the first step to really complying with that Commonwealth law. You think it's difficult now? Just wait and do nothing, and it's only going to be harder and more expensive. All right, that's the reality of the whole thing. Essentially, this ordinance provides the city with a glide path to meeting legally mandated reductions, giving building owners the time and assistance they need, and for smooth and economical transition to all electric technologies. You can think about it really as a consumer protection regulation. So let's do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's now, you've used the time, I believe, and does anyone else, I think, Commission? So thank you. And I would like to turn to Mr. Riedman, I believe, is here representing the Chamber of Commerce, is in the virtual space. Mr. Riedman, you had indicated you might have more than one presenter, but I'm going to open the 15 minutes to you, and then you can tell us who needs to be promoted to be a panelist.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity. I want to just begin by saying that no one debates that the need that collectively we have to reduce our carbon footprint. Our businesses understand that. This is not a debate about whether this is a serious problem or a problem that needs to be addressed. We understand that. We understand that both residents and businesses need to work together to reduce our emissions and move away from fossil fuels. What we do need to do and would like to start doing tonight is help the council and the city understand the ordinance before us, understand the challenges it presents, understand the unresolved issues, and understand the costs. And there are many unresolved issues here. the way the ordinance is written. For many property owners and tenants.
Before you get fully underway, just please identify yourself.
Oh, sure.
We all know.
My
who
name
you
is
are.
Greg Reedman. I am president and CEO of the Charles River Regional Chamber and a resident at 10 Mayflower Terrace in Newton Highlands.
Thank you. Carry on.
So as I was saying, there are many unresolved issues for many property owners and tenants. We just need to acknowledge this is going to be difficult and it's going to be expensive. And for the city, it's going to require resources. And I think far more resources than are being planned or were just acknowledged. I do think this is more complicated than some may be admitting. This program will drive up rents. It will make some properties obsolete, including potentially some houses of worship, some nonprofits, and for sure, some of our older, naturally affordable buildings that are homes to residents or businesses that we care about. It will impact Newton's economic competitiveness. There's no question in my mind about that. Tonight, we're going to hear from 3 property owners. Dante Capasso from Capasso Realty will take up the bulk of our time tonight, speaking about how expensive this would be for property owners and tenants and how difficult it is to implement this program. And then briefly, we'll also hear from Marcus DeCastro from Boylston Properties, who will speak about the mechanics of Birdo and administering it. And finally, we'll hear from Bill Norman from Boston Development Group, who will speak to Boston Birdo and how what their experience has been. Boston Development owns a lot of property in Newton, including buildings with restaurants and retail and office buildings, but they also own property in Boston and they've experienced Birdo firsthand. And most importantly, the 3 of them are anxious to answer any questions you have, because I think that's going to be the most important part of this. So we'll turn it over to Dante when he's ready.
Thank you. And again, I would just ask, as you each panelist speak, identify yourself again for the record.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. My name is Dante Capasso, 49 Lexington Street, Newton, Massachusetts, our work address. Our family business, Capasso Realty, has developed, built, owned, and managed multifamily and commercial properties in Newton since 1967. 181 Lexington Street is one of our buildings, as Ms. Brown said. Tonight, I'm here to talk about 3 things: the impact Birdo will have on my family business, what is required to comply with Birdo, and the role I've played in these discussions over the past 2 years, and finally, how much this will cost and the significant unintended consequences that Birdo will have on affordability of many types. Birdo will fundamentally change how our family has done business for over 50 years. Today, I know you'll hear from many passionate people on the need to act on climate change. While I agree much needs to be done, unfortunately, Birdo will have an adverse effect on building owners, shops, restaurants, houses of worships, nonprofits, and tenants, both commercial and residential. While I realize the ordinance in front of you only talks about non-residential buildings, you might call them commercial, I am also keenly aware of the intention to add residential to the ordinance in the future. Our family owns 7 residential and 6 non-residential buildings that would all need significant work over the next 20+ years to meet Birdo targets. I want to acknowledge previous discussions that have encouraged capital planning to prepare for this. However, capital planning is not a feasible answer to this ordinance, as the upgrades would be far beyond the scope of normal building upkeep, as nearly every wall, mechanical system, window, electrical capacity would require replacement or work, not to mention how that would significantly affect the assessed values of all these said properties and affecting our city's tax base. The simple fact that colleagues of mine are talking about discussing loans to pay for this work affirms my point. Can you think of many ordinances you of a council have passed that require business owners to take out significant debt to comply with? I have been involved with Birdo since the beginning. I was the first member of the advisory council, attended dozens of meetings and calls, and to my knowledge was the only member to allow many of these groups crafting this ordinance access to our buildings. During this time, I vocalized my issues with Birdo implementation. Most of the affected buildings have natural gas powered forced hot water that is pumped to each apartment on their own thermostat. It is a centralized system. Lower emissions over time are not really possible. It is either all or nothing. The most typical solution today would be all electric air source heat pumps. Last year, I had a site visit with members of the City Council, Newton Sustainability Team, Green Newton, Newton Citizens Commission of Energy, Synapse, and the Chamber's Environment Committee. As each unit would require nearly gut renovations to add electrical capacity, mini split heat pumps, and insulation, either interior or exterior, this would result in months of lost rent per unit, years of construction our tenants would have to live through, and mass displacement of our tenants. They all agreed this would not be an efficient solution. This leads us to the quote that was included in a recent letter to you from the Newton Citizens Commission of Energy for a different technology. That quote was about $500,000, or 5 times the amount to replace a gas boiler. As a licensed construction supervisor, a LEED accredited professional, and actively right now constructing 24 new units of housing in Newton, I can confidently tell you this quote is not the full picture. I estimate off the top adding 15 to 20% for permits, engineering, general conditions, and many other things that I know come up during construction. A potentially large number currently up for debate is adding the significant electrical service. We are looking into that. I estimate the final number to be close to $1 million. My colleagues closer to the 500,000. So for my example, let's meet in the middle, $750,000 per apartment building to add this technology. If I added 200, and these are very real numbers, $250 to every one of my tenants' rent in a 25-unit building, in the middle between 20 and 30 units is what we have, 25-unit building, and set aside that money for renovations, it would take 10 years to raise the $750,000. $250 at my current market rates would be over an 11.3% increase for our current market rate 1-bedrooms and a 9.6% increase for our 2-bedroom units. Please keep in mind these increases would be in addition to the normal rent increases that the market demands. I think you will agree these amounts are not trivial, and these are real current numbers. There is one more thing that I need to know about this quote. This technology being used as case to implement BERDO and include multifamily is not currently being used for heating anywhere for buildings of this size. Let me say that again. It is not being used anywhere for heat. The only example I could be given by the many people I asked, including the people who gave me the quote, was it's being used for one building in New York City for domestic hot water only, not heat. Quickly pivoting to non-residential buildings, they're called commercial in this ordinance, but it includes nonprofits, houses of worship, any building over 20,000 square feet that is non-residential. Many of them share the same problems as apartments in terms of centralized systems. In the spirit of transparency, I will say many of our office buildings have ductwork, which make it logistically easier, but the cost is just as big of concern. Across our affected buildings, we have dozens of HVAC rooftop units that would need to be replaced, most of them well inside their useful life. Anyone who knows about air source heat pumps knows they are only as good as the building's thermal envelope. To implement them, significant insulation work would need to be done as well, and potentially windows. Unfortunately, due to the strength of the commercial office market, as well as the length of our commercial leases, we do not have the ability to raise the funds we would need, which will again shift more of this burden to our residential tenants. That's why it's important to know that even if residential is left out of this ordinance, these non-residential commercial buildings and the costs needed to comply is very much a housing affordability issue. This money has to come from somewhere. I would like to end by paraphrasing some comments I heard last Friday at the Charles River Chamber's breakfast by the State Housing Secretary, Ed Augustus. He said some of the last naturally affordable housing in the state is owned by small family landlords who do not push rents as high as they can because they do not have to. By passing BERDO, you will make it virtually impossible for our family to continue to be one of those landlords. I urge you not to pass BERDO and find a different solution that can be workable and make meaningful change. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes and 45 seconds.
Great. So we're Bill Norman and Marcus DeCastro. If he's here, I don't see him, but Bill, maybe you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Bill Norman. I work for Boston Development Group in Newton Center. I've been involved with BERDO for the last 5 years for our Boston portfolio. Just to speak to Dante's point a little about more costs, there are some other things in there, cost associations, third-party authentication, bringing in people to sign certain things. It's not just as simple as it looks. And as far as the energy portfolio goes, there are a lot of glitches. I don't think the city has enough people. I know that I heard the commissioner mention that, they have 6 people. That's news to me. I work with one semi-closely, and it's not, a very personal relationship, just exchanging emails. And we've had a lot of issues, server error issues with the portfolio. glitches with just passwords, logging in, meter information. So there are a lot of things that come up, and it's very time consuming, for companies to do all this as well. So that's it.
Thank you. And Marcus DeCastro, I'm not sure if you're here. I don't know. I can't see unless you raise your hand.
Is Norton, have we got?
So, Mr. Chairman, if he's not here, we'll stop there. And, and really, I think the most important thing we could do, though, is answer the questions from the counselors, because I do think that it requires a back and forth. And really, at the end of the day, our point is that it's not that we're not supportive of these things, but they are not as simple as folks are making it out to be. And it does have huge implications for everybody in our buildings here.
Thank you. Since you have 4 minutes and 41 seconds left, are there questions from members of the council or committee who are here, or any representative? Councillor Albright, member of the committee.
So I'm just wondering you're talking about loans. I'm wondering what interest rate your assumptions are with these loans. And would a program of low interest loans help?
Just indicate who you're directing your question to.
Mr. Capasso.
Okay,
Thank you. Yes. I'm not really considering loans because that's not how we do business. And I think I really think it's frankly unreasonable to ask any sort of business owner to take out significant debt to comply with this ordinance. So lower interest rates, higher interest rates, it's still money that needs to get paid back. And it's a significant cost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, the ultimate question is, we're all going down the tubes on this planet, and you're saying it's too expensive to implement Berto, and I don't know what the solution is, but I think we better figure it out.
Is that a
That's
question?
a rhetorical question.
Okay,
but if-
well, I'll answer it. I mean,
Please, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I do agree. Much needs to be done. My main point here is really not to argue that, it's to tell you the unintended consequences. Because what I'm saying needs to be taken as fact about the costs it will take. And 2, I have another solution for Berto if you don't hear it.
Okay, offline, we can talk about it.
Absolutely. But yes, I'm not here to debate whether it's needed. I'm here to, I think, educate on the costs and the repercussions. Thank you.
So, Councillor Danberg, you had a question for?
Just put me on the list.
Well, you're the next on the list.
Okay, great. I have a question for Helena Brown.
No, that was part of the.
Mr. Chairman, Marcus is here. We'd love to get him in.
So if you have a question for the chamber speakers, that would
Through the
be.
president, if I may.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Marcus DeCastro is here, and I'm wondering if we could get him to comment briefly about his experience. Marcus, thank you.
Do you mind yielding from Councillor Danberg so that they can finish?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll keep this brief. Good evening, council members. My name is Marcus DeCastro of Boylston Properties. My family and I moved to Newton in 1998. My family still currently lives on Chestnut Street in Woburn. I would like to ask the committee to consider allocating additional resources for Berto administration, especially in the initial first few years, or in the initiative's first few years. While the role of the Berto administrator is well defined, I'm concerned that in practice, the bandwidth of the administrator will be rapidly consumed, leaving minimal support for property owners as we navigate through the ordinance. There will be quite a few unique scenarios, all requiring individual attention, such as the review and acceptance of hardship compliance plans, individual compliance schedules, deadline extension requests, appeals to fines or disputes regarding emissions disclosures, and the determination of blended emission standards. Having adequate availability and access to resources, at least for the first few years, will help support the ordinance's success. And finally, I believe Ms. Brown sort of alluded to this earlier, but the city of Boston has recently engaged a third-party contractor to launch an admissions calculator, which for us personally has become an incredible tool and resource for us to sort of help give us a starting point for our Berto road mapping. And I would strongly urge the council to consider a similar tool. Thank you all.
Thank you. Let me go back. Councilor Danber, you were asking a question of the Energy Commission. I want to make sure we use the time for the chamber folks and make sure. So other questions from anyone on the committee to members of the chamber? Any members of the council not on the committee? Councilor Katz.
Very specifically, I'd like to, for the people that have spoken, you know, whether or not they're aware of state resources that they can apply, you know, just even in terms of technical help.
So I guess that's to Mr. Reedman, or you want to take that one?
Well, you know, there are some programs out there, but I'm not aware of any specific ones that do what we're trying to do on the timetable that we're looking at. And I think that's the problem, is that there really is not a clear path to how businesses are going to be supported here locally.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Capasso, you want to respond to that question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure there will be resources. I'm of the opinion they will be pennies when dollars are needed. It will help. I would apply for them. I'm doing it now for 4 EV chargers. I'm putting it in one of my office properties, and it is a significant amount of work for a relatively insignificant amount of money. So my concern would be what it would take. So I'm not discounting that. I will look into that. They can be useful, but I just have a feeling it won't make a significant enough dent in the price. Thank you, Councilor.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Oliver? We've got a minute left.
I will be brief. Thank you, Chair. I would assume this question is probably best directed to Mr. Reedman. Excuse me. I am curious, one of the topics that immediately strikes me when we start to consider Birdo and implementing that within the confines of the city of Newton is how do we remain competitive with our neighbors? I don't know who those would be, and I would imagine they vary dramatically based on the businesses that would be impacted or that would be included in Birdo. And this question is really, other than this would increase the cost of rent and related costs, I'm assuming, utilities and so on and so forth, and the equipment and so forth, I would assume for a small period of time, could be more expensive to maintain, but I am curious to know how we could get an idea of what this would do to the competitive nature of Newton vis-a-vis competitive cities.
Good question. Thank you. I'm going to let Bill Norman or Marcus DeCastro speak to that. They both own properties both inside and outside of Newton.
Does either one of you have Mr. Castro or Mr. Capasso?
Bill, do you want to try that, or Marcus?
Capasso, you want to? Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. DeCastro.
I'm sorry, I blanked on the question.
So Marcus, it really is a question whether or not what this means to competitiveness. What will it mean to attracting tenants to Newton versus Waltham, which doesn't have this kind of, if it did not have in place something similar.
I think it relates more to what Mr. Capasso is saying, and the cost to sort of bring our products to market. It's going to be a lot more challenging to be able to do that successfully. Effectively driving up rents.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee for the chamber or their representatives? If not, I want to thank Mr. Reedman and your colleagues, Mr. Capasso and Mr. DeCastro, for taking the time. And I would notice you appeared to be reading from a statement. If your statement is something you feel comfortable submitting in writing, either or both of you, that would be welcome. And you can direct it to Ms. Norton on behalf of the committee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We actually have a list of questions which we will submit tomorrow morning of things that we think are important to be looked at and considered, and the things we don't understand.
All right, and thank you for staying within the 3 minutes. I mean the 15 minutes. Okay, I now want to move to the public comment period that we don't have a specific 15-minute time set, but for 3 minutes. And Ms. Norton will get the list, and we'll take those comments. And then after those comments are concluded, I want to bring it back into committee to talk about our process and what questions people might have. So the first person on the list is Lindsay, I believe it's Gilden or Gilden.
With very bad handwriting, yes.
So you can say it for us?
My name's Lindsay Golden.
Golden, I beg your pardon. Okay,
I live at 19 Garland Road. In addition to being a concerned citizen of Newton, I'm also a trained climate scientist and a former employee of ExxonMobil. So wrap your head around that. So I can say I speak with authority regarding climate science and the disinformation and misinformation techniques that are actively being used by oil and gas. I strongly support, as a climate scientist, as a resident of Newton, as a citizen, the implementation of BERDO in one unified path. Even though it will cause costs for business owners, not doing anything is going to cost us a hell of a lot more. Climate change is the voting issue. It is the issue of all issues, and we in Newton have the opportunity to lead the Commonwealth by using government in the public interest. So I commend the City Council of Newton, specifically the councilors who have put this together, for advancing an ordinance that uses the power of government for the public good. Yes, there are going to be some people who suffer. The people who suffer are the business owners. The people who will suffer if we don't implement a zero carbon economy are all of us, the business owners, everyone's rent. It's fundamentally important. And so I commend you for this. I urge you to pass it as a citizen of Newton, as a citizen of the US, as a citizen of the world. Also on the same topic, I commend you for passing the regulation that says we should shift to electricity. I regret that you did not include gas stoves in that. I think that was a major missed opportunity. But there's always next year. So thank you very much and keep up the good work.
thank you. Next, I have Diane, I believe it's Stratopoulos. You'll have to pronounce it properly for me.
Hi, my name is Demi Stathopoulos. I live at 71 Arlington Street.
Thank you.
I am a member of 350 Mass and also a member of the First Unitarian Universalist Society in Newton. I want to appreciate Mr. Ferguson's reference to the large and increasing costs of climate-fueled storms in the past 6 months. I've seen storms in 2 places I've previously lived, nor'easters in Wells, Maine, and tornadoes in Gaithersburg, Maryland, leading to the destruction of homes due to historic levels of storm damage. These experiences color my strong support for Newton's Climate Action Plan and for the BERDO proposal. Although we have not yet experienced catastrophic damage in our city, I feel we need to work diligently to mitigate climate change, to reduce our climate greenhouse gas emissions. I support the Energy Commission's position on BERDO, and as a member of the First Unitarian Universalist Society in Newton, I can report that our volunteer building committee has been using the Energy Star portfolio manager reporting system suggested by BERDO for many years to track our greenhouse gas emissions. We found that the initial data entry was the largest part of the effort. It took us about 30 minutes. After that, it was straightforward to use. Entering a month's data only takes about 5 minutes. Complying with the reporting portion of the ordinance will not be difficult for us. Our church has already started moving away from fossil fuels by installing air-sourced heat pumps in some parts of the building. Our emissions data, according to the portfolio manager, shows that as a place of assembly, we will not be required by the proposed ordinance to make any further changes until period 4, which is about 2045. I will also say, for those concerned about houses of worship, which have been mentioned several times, that this will not be feasible for houses of worship, there will be a presentation on June 25th over in the War Memorial Room by Interfaith Power and Light. on greening houses of worship that will be providing houses of worship with information about resources and ways in which they can comply with the proposed Berto ordinance and with our morally felt obligation to address climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Marsha Cooper.
Marsha Cooper from 170 Evelyn Road in Woburn. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to speak on behalf of Green Newton's support of the proposed Berto ordinance. Green Newton urges you to pass the Berto ordinance because it can lead to a significant reduction of harmful greenhouse gas emissions from existing large buildings. These buildings produce the highest level of emissions that exacerbate the very costly and unhealthy impacts of climate change. We ask our elected leaders to demonstrate a genuine commitment to achieving the objectives of Newton's Climate Action Plan to meet the goal of net zero by 2050. Berto will make a significant difference for reaching our climate goals when large property owners are required to abide by clear expectations that will require the reporting of their property's energy use and emissions to the city annually. And what a real difference it will make in subsequent years when these property owners demonstrate reductions in energy use and emissions to meet benchmarks established for their building's type, with the goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. Stepping aside for a second, from my personal point of view, is that when you're making energy saving changes in your building, it seems to me like you would be saving money at the same time. So those that has to be figured into the equations. Anyway, Green Newton supports the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy's position that the Berto ordinance should include the residential sector in 2024, which consists of 29% of the total number of buildings and an estimated 20% of total emissions from all large buildings. Unnecessary short-sighted delays will only hamper the much-needed vital steps for achieving the goals set out in Newton's Climate Action Plan. Newton's Climate Action Plan. How are we going to get there if we don't take steps like this? Think about that. For these reasons, we urge the Zoning and Planning Committee to adopt Berto in its complete residential multifamily buildings, 20,000 feet or larger. And I want to echo what Demi Stathopoulos said, to remind people that, as Bill Ferguson had said, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that $92 billion in costs for climate disasters in one recent year. Demi said 6 months. What if it's 1 year or 6 months? We're facing a very costly problems in our community and in our country and the world. Thank you. Who's going to pay for those climate disasters? That's what I want to leave you with. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Okay, I want to hear from the next speaker, Walter Einstein. Okay, then Betsy Harper.
Betsy Harper, 19 Fairmont Avenue, Newtonville. I'm an industry expert, and I have 3 minutes to race through my many comments. We've given 15 minutes to building owners, and we have not given enough time to the multiple industry experts like myself that live in this rich community of professionals. In any case, I'm a member of Green Newton's Building Standards Committee and the treasurer of Passive House Massachusetts, the statewide agency for education and advocacy. My husband and I also own a condo on Washington Park, and I'm one of 3 trustees for that association. So I know about the difficulty of finding savings to put into a maintenance reserve.
and I know it can be done. Berto is to me an informed professional in the industry, a slam dunk. But you are hearing loudly from a few building owners that they are scared. They don't understand the technology, and the technology is in fact new. It will be different in the next 20 years, in the next 10 years. We have a lot of unknowns, but we have a vision for what is going to happen. And also building owners, they bought a property located in Newton. So at that time, they signed on to abide by Newton's governmental leadership. Government exists to enforce sometimes tough laws for the greater good and not be swayed by the interests of the few. Your role is to make sure the tough laws aren't too tough and don't overly disadvantage the few. So what do I say to these few owners who are fearful of a huge price tag? I say 4 things. Many of the required renovations won't start for most building owners until 2030, 2036, as Mr. Capasso's building will require. That's 12 years from now, plenty of time to start reserving for the future. What we're doing now is asking for data reporting. You can't fix what you don't measure. There's an oversized fear by several building owners that the price tag will be huge and impossible. Yes, building owners will have to increase the contribution they make to their reserve, but boilers will fail in the next 12 years. So these owners need to plan for the eventual replacement with higher tech, much more efficient cooling systems. Mr. Capasso referred to his concern about this new technology, only one example in New York City that has been referred to him. Do you think our worldwide mechanical engineers who are working on this problem will have figured it out by 2036? I have confidence that they will have.
You have 20 seconds.
Okay, save my point. I will tell you, I personally oversaw the installation of 10,000 air source heat pump units at low-income housing for the Commonwealth. In none of them did we do a gut renovation. I'm afraid that the building owners have no idea of really how to implement some of this technology, which will continue to decrease in cost, which will continue to be increasingly supported by the utilities through their required increasing allocation to Mass Save. And the fear of the unknown overwhelms the fact that we actually do have a plan. The state is committed to a zero emissions standard by 2050, and they will support it.
Ms. Harper, you're out of time.
You're right, I'm out of time because you've given disproportionate time to building owners who don't understand this. That's not their business. They run buildings. They don't
Ms.
understand
Harper,
what the rest
we're
of us
delighted
do.
to have your comments in writing. Thank you. Our next speaker is Lori Timmerman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Timmerman, and I'm a National Grid Community Solutions Account Manager, helping the City of Newton with the Mass Save program to better serve the customers in the city. My role with National Grid as one of the sponsors of Mass Save, but I'm also representing Energy Source here tonight as the other sponsor of Mass Save in the city. I work to help property owners impacted by this ordinance to identify ways to save energy and to decarbonize buildings. Mass Save offers incentives for implementing these energy conservation and decarbonization measures. For example, measures which help insulate and air seal facilities will not only reduce emissions, but also help future HVAC improvements to be sized properly. Additionally, the program offers incentives for air, water, and ground source heat pump solutions. To help implement these changes, there are 0% interest on bill repayment options for funding assistance on some of the project types I've described. I very much look forward to helping Newton reach your climate action goals and support this Berto ordinance as a means to help electrify and decarbonize buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. And Carolyn Latimer?
Hello, my name's Carolyn Latin. I live at 277 Park Street in Newton Corner, and I speak to you today as a mother and as a member of Mothers Out Front and as a recently retired eighth grade civics teacher in a neighboring community. My time teaching those 13-year-olds taught me that children today are so angry with the adults. They're so angry with their leaders for doing nothing. This is our opportunity to show them that we care about these issues. What is for us a pocketbook issue right now is for them an existential issue. They do not see you leading. I hope that you will change that.
Thank you very much. And thank all of you. Is there anyone else who's not on the list who would like to be heard? As an individual, certainly.
My name is Philip Hanser. I'm a resident at 40 Cedar Street in Newton. I'd like to just address a couple of the questions about financing, as well as the question of development. The reason that we had discussed the possibility of loans was because we thought the opportunity cost of equity held by apartment owners was sufficiently high that the cost of borrowing would be a more effective way of doing it, as opposed to setting up a sinking fund. So generally, and the reason that is the case is because under the current tax code, the tax code permits basically the cost of financing to be taken off as a part of net income, so that off of gross income to create a better net income. And so sinking funds.
Talking to the mic.
I'm sorry. So sinking funds generally are not the best option in terms of the manner of doing financing. In addition to which, as National Grid has pointed out, they provide various kinds of financing options that allow for a more cost-effective investment to be made by building owners. In addition to which, of course, in the case of Mass Save, for example, they are now giving a $2,500 per ton rebate on all heat pumps. And so that's a further reduction in the cost. My point only is that in doing the calculation about what the actual costs will be for the building owners, it's not necessarily merely the investment costs. There are tax benefits, there are mechanisms to get, for example, by capital leasing and so on, that on net reduce the cost per ton or per installation of these investments. And so it's not merely the gross amount, it has to be considered the net amount against which all of the rebates, the financing, and the tax benefits are taken. The second point I'd like to make is the question about development, it seems to me, is kind of I won't say it's irrelevant, but Newton is in a position, relatively speaking, compared to other communities, of having unique situation relative to transportation and other kinds of resources compared to other cities that make Newton unique. There's a reason why developers really want to come to Newton. We have an amazing school system and so on, and we have other kinds of resources in terms of transportation that are unique relative to any other community around here. Any other place you want to go, you'll find those resources aren't nearly as good as they are in Newton. And so raising the cost by some small relative percentage of the cost of a commercial building isn't going to have any large impact, frankly, in terms of the development of Newton. And lastly, I do think, as was pointed out.
Your time is about up.
My question is, what is our responsibility to the future generations? If we don't even think about that in terms of what we're doing, then we've really sort of lost our way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? And again, any of you who've spoken are welcome to submit further comments in writing or to elaborate anything you've said. But we wanted to give a chance for our colleagues to hear. Any comments or questions from members of the committee before we close out this public comment? Oh, we have some people online. I beg your pardon. I didn't realize. Okay. Councilor, excuse me, Ms. Norton. Let's go to the other comments. Okay. Ms. Marshall. Ms. Marshall, you're muted. Now you're live. Okay?
Okay. Good evening. I'm Kara Marshall from Eversource. I'm the manager of business intelligence for the Energy Efficiency, Demand Response, and Electric Mobility Department at Eversource. I'm glad my colleague from National Grid spoke to the Mass Save programs. My role is a little bit different at Eversource. I support, among my duties, is supporting the reporting to the Boston and Cambridge ordinances. Eversource and National Grid as well have created pathways for building owners to request whole building consumption data. When owners or account holders, we have a data sharing agreement where they can automatically have their energy consumption shared to Energy Star Portfolio Manager to reduce that burden somewhat. However, it can be a little more challenging when an owner is not also the account holder. In that case, we've created the Energy Reporting and Disclosure Portal at eversource.com that allows a building owner to search on an address and request aggregated usage for the tenants in the building. When a building has 4 or more tenants and no single tenant uses more than 50% of the energy, that data is shared automatically as it's considered fully anonymized. Energy data is considered a private piece of private information by the Department of Public Utilities, and so we treat it carefully. When there are fewer than 4 tenants or one tenant uses more than 50% of the energy, a release from the tenant is required, but we are able to work with landlords in order to help them get the data they need to report. In addition to just supporting the reporting process, my team also works with our partners in the energy efficiency and decarbonization programs to help identify proactively buildings that are high energy users and help them reach out with the appropriate solutions in order to achieve their goals and the goals of the Mass Save program. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is who's next up? John Dundon, I believe. Dundon? Are you there? Yeah. Mr. Dundon, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Let me just put myself on video. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is John Dundon. I live at 71 Fordham Road in West Newton. I attend the First Unitarian Universalist Society. I work in high tech, and I've seen technology changes really fast. Just to amplify what Betsy Harper said. So if people have until 2036, 2040 to comply, a lot can change. My comments are around the climate emergency that I see. In the year 2006, our former Vice President Al Gore produced the movie called An Inconvenient Truth. And one of the memorable phrases that people might remember from that movie was that the planet has a fever. That year, the global average temperature was 58.3 degrees Fahrenheit, which was about 2.5% higher than the average temperature between 1901 and the year 2000, and at the time was the warmest year on record. If we fast forward to 2023, the average temperature was 59.1 degrees Fahrenheit, which is almost 1 degree warmer than that year that film came out. It may not sound like a whole lot to people not as familiar with the nuts and bolts of climate science, but to the experts in the field, this is of extreme concern. It leads to stronger storms, more flooding, more hurricanes, more glaciers melting, higher sea levels, and hundreds of other effects on the delicate balance that allows for thriving life on our planet. The events, I mentioned climate emergency. There's 2 events that happened just this year. Brazil, this spring, 600,000 people were displaced from their homes by unprecedented flooding and over 2 million people affected. In Pakistan last summer, 8 million people were displaced from their homes. 1/3 of the habitable land in that country was underwater. So this isn't a theoretical thing that we need to plan for in the future. I think this is happening right now. It's a pretty urgent global issue that we in Newton should be doing all we can. I think the Berto initiative is a thoughtful approach, and it's one of many ways we can be addressing this issue. I think this is a state and a national issue as well. We can't do it alone. I think it's just a start, and I also support the residential component of Berto. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Who's up next? All right, Ms. Callaway, Cindy Callaway. You're muted, Ms. Callaway.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight, and thank you for this meeting. My name is Cindy Callaway, and I live at 83 Grove Hill Avenue in Newton, and I'm also a member of Mothers Out Front Newton. We have already contacted the mayor and the councilors in our support of Berto, but I would like to emphasize why it's so important for Newton to adopt the Berto ordinance in its entirety. For buildings over 20,000 square feet for commercial and residential. Buildings are Newton's largest source of greenhouse gas emission, and Berto addresses reducing these emissions in a reasonable timeline, enabling the owners of these buildings to plan ahead, to update their energy systems, ramping up over a period of time. We have a critical goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050, Newton's own climate action plan and the state's Mass Clean Energy and Climate Plan. Those are both key focuses that we should be all very aware of and driving towards. Focusing on the largest greenhouse gas emitters first will make the most immediate impact on our emission reductions. We need to move quickly, and Berto is one of the many steps we need to take to make a difference in our climate crisis. As a member of Mothers Out Front, our focus has been on providing a livable climate for our children. And I think all of us have to look at the future and what that means. I understand from what everything the business owners have indicated at our meeting tonight that it's going to be expensive, but as others have said, it's very expensive for all of us in the end if we don't achieve this. We are in the midst of a climate crisis, and we have to take these steps now to mitigate our risk and achieve these goals that we have set for ourselves and for our children's future. So we have to act quickly and we have to act now. And I want to thank you and hope that we will take this important step forward.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is Newton. Dan Rubin. I should mention we've been joined by Councilor Lobowitz. I'm not sure I announced you at the beginning of the meeting, but welcome. You've been here for a while, I think. Mr. Rubin no longer online? Oh, you may have to unmute yourself. Maybe can't see whether you're muted or not. There you go.
Could you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. I'm Dan Rubin. I live at 175 Auburn Street. I represent Green Newton on the Newton Berto Working Group. Berto is indeed burdensome government regulation. While energy efficiency projects often have a good payback, the requirement to convert existing fossil fuel buildings to all electric by 2050 is a costly, if one-time project. Newton's large building owners would have a decade or two to comply with this project, to plan for it, but still, it would impose a significant financial burden. Despite this burden, we must pass BERDO if we are going to adhere to Newton's climate action plan. Failure to meet climate action goals in Newton and the rest of the world would put the ultimate burden on our young and middle-aged citizens who face greater and greater climate catastrophes for the rest of this century. This month, the American West is experiencing record-breaking temperatures yet again. Major droughts have caused Mexico City and Bogota to run low on water. Extreme heat in Mexico has caused hundreds of monkeys to fall dead out of trees. Delhi hit 122 degrees, a record. They also have a water crisis. The death toll is high and mounting. The same is true in Pakistan. The previous month's climate news was also grim. Next month's climate news will be grim too. Our climate is moving decidedly in one direction, worse. The Earth has now experienced record high temperatures for 12 consecutive months. This past year, New England experienced record destructive flooding in Montpelier and much of central Vermont, record destructive flooding in Leominster, and considerable erosion of our coastline from rising seas. Indeed, the walls are closing in. The pain of climate change will be much greater than the cost of addressing it. For the sake of our young and middle-aged citizens, let's pass BERDO, and let's ensure that we meet our climate goals for other sectors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Okay. Peter Bearer.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Peter Barrer. I live at 60 Endicott Street in Newton Highlands. I'm going to be brief. The climate emergency is a big problem worldwide. It has huge implications worldwide. We haven't really experienced the problem in Newton yet. It's a common problem. We all share it. The solution to climate change is a common solution. And we all carry the cost of climate change, even just by reading the newspaper and hearing the details you've been listening to. We all have to carry the cost of making the changes to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Of course, a business owner will take his personal point of view. How does this affect my business? But I'm talking to a governmental leadership group here. And I urge our leaders to lead with the big picture in mind. Passing BERDO is a step we need to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. We have one other online. Jonathan Cantor.
Hi, sorry for the delay. The Zoom system takes a minute. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine, thank you.
My name is Jonathan Cantor. I live at 672 Chestnut Street in Newton. I agree with all of the points that the proponents of BERDO have emphasized this evening. And I certainly encourage everyone to pass BERDO with the residential proportion. I have heard concern about costs, and I'll remind folks that costs of some of this technology will get cheaper, but the cost of doing nothing and waiting and then having to do it, say, in 2040 or 2045 in order to decarbonize by 2050 will be much more expensive. Not only maybe it will be more expensive because it will be difficult to change that quickly, but you may have, a building owner may have already improved their existing equipment in the interim and then have to replace it before it's at its end of its useful life. And additionally, I don't think it's been really considered that these new improvements will actually increase the value of these buildings. And buildings that don't decarbonize will become less desirable as we get closer and closer to 2050 and commit and lower values in the market. There's also a lot of concern about the technology. And I'll say that I'm a builder and I design and build high efficiency residential buildings predominantly, but I do also consult on commercial buildings and large residential, and I'm on the design review committee as well. And the technology is here. We're now using ground source heat pumps at all of our new schools. That was a proposition that we didn't think was possible 5 years ago. Even though the technology was around, it just hadn't been, not enough people had really started to use it to make it seem worthwhile, and eliminate concerns about using that technology. We saw that with mini splits and heat and air-to-air source heat pumps, where adopting the new technology had a little bit of a steep learning curve, but once adopted, all the new developers are using it in their buildings now as a preferred way to heat and cool their buildings. I think we'll see the same in air to water source heat pumps. In 5 or 10 years, they'll be standard equipment. And then finally, we really need to include large residential buildings with central heating and cooling systems. They're big buildings just like any other commercial big building, and to be very important to include them.
You're out of time.
Thank you. Please do this for our children and our grandkids. Act now, and please pass Berto. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just pause for a second. We have some additional speakers, one in the chamber and one online. Let me just confer with Ms. Norton a minute about our schedule here. Okay, let me go into the chamber. We've had an additional former member of the city council who's always welcome under any conditions, but tonight, you want to identify yourself for the record, please?
Sure. Amy Sangiolo, 389 Central Street. Thank you for having this hearing, the public hearing on this. I am a strong supporter of Berto. I really do hope that you do move forward with this. I remember, I think back in either 2021 or 2022, when this council passed a resolution to move forward with this. And it's unfortunate that it's taken this long to get to this point, but I hope that you do move forward with it. I think it's very clear that we heard from business owners like Mr. Capasso that there will be a cost. And I think we all recognize and acknowledge that there will be a major cost to a lot of businesses, but we do need to go forward. So I urge you, the city council and the city and the mayor, to really partner with the state and federal government and make sure that any types of grants or any other type of financial assistance can be made available to these business owners so that we can move forward and deal with the existential crisis that faces us and, most importantly, our children. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We've also been joined by the former chair of this committee, who is Councilor Crossley, I believe.
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Coming from another meeting, I only heard
Just
the last.
identify yourself for
I
the
will.
public. We all know who you are, but the public.
Right. I'm Deb Crossley, and I live still at 26 Circuit Avenue in Newton. I was coming from another meeting, so I've only heard the last 10 or so speakers since Betsy Harper. So perhaps I'm not hearing this correctly, but 3 years ago, the city council, I believe unanimously, passed a resolution to proceed to develop a Berto type program. I understand why it's taken this long. th- the staff have done a tremendous job at reaching deep into the property owners of the larger buildings and thinking carefully through how to structure introducing this program to our community in a way that we can manage so that we have the correct staff, so we can organize the correct kind of technical assistance as it is necessary. I see that there's been excellent work done here. So I hope that it's not whether we adopt the Birdo, but perhaps we're talking about how quickly to advance the program, possibly what to take on first and second. With respect to that, I'll only say if we don't take on the large residential buildings this year, we must take them on next year. And that is what the mayor has directed the staff to do. And as you all know, any city councilor can docket that item next year if the administration should fail to do so. It makes no practical difference whether or not you adopt that piece this year because the time frame doesn't change. The time frame for compliance and actually achieving emissions doesn't change one way or the other in the proposal. For all the reasons that my good friends on the Building Standards Committee of Green Newton and others have mentioned, we must take this action now. We've created the program. It's very, very good, and we can do it, and we should do it. I want to thank candidate Sangiolo for also stating, because we do need to make sure that we keep our sustainability team intact and our ability to connect with the state and its resources and the feds and its resources to help guide our property owners through this process and help advertise the funding sources that are likely to be available and the technical help that's likely to be available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right on the nut. Okay, I think is that our last speaker? Okay. Thank you all for speaking. And again, the committee will be glad through Ms. Norton to entertain any written comments you have. I want to bring it back into committee because the hour is late. Mr. Ferguson has been gracious to spend his time with us as have members of the planning board as well as the planning staff. My hope is that there's an opportunity during the next few weeks over the summer to take the comments that have been prepared and generated and have Mr. Ferguson and his colleagues look into those to bring back to the committee at a meeting early in September, so that we'll have an opportunity to see what we can do in the committee to move this forward or what other issues are going to be outstanding. But I think it's important that the technical and economic questions be thoroughly examined so that we can make sure that we've got this as thought out as we can. But I want to see if that's the sense of the committee as well. Councilor Albright?
So I have a question for Mr. Ferguson about that, if I may.
Sure.
So, Mr. Ferguson, the issues were raised about the way the city does the city have enough resources to manage this once it's implemented? So that's one of my questions for you. And the other one is, are we providing the financial information that building owners would need? Do we have any expertise in that area so that people can feel more comfortable moving forward and that there are some supports to do this program?
Ferguson, you can respond briefly now and elaborate more later if you'd like. Carry on.
Thank you for the question. We've carefully looked at the staff needs, and actually one of the reasons that we've phased the implementation in the way we have is to be able to do it with staffing levels that would be suitable for like one FTE supported by consultants to support. So we have carefully looked at what we will need for staff. We feel like we're in really good shape by having a FTE combined with our expert consultant Synapse. And with the way the program is being phased in, we think we're in good shape as far as staffing. If it turns out, we find out we need more staff, then that's something we can address down the road. But I'm confident that initially, we're not going to have that staffing problem at all.
So, and that includes financial consultants who can help business owners, yes?
Yes, we have a consultant budget now. We have Synapse under contract. They've been under contract for a year and a half. We actually have funding in the FY25 budget of $165,000 available to, keep Synapse under contract and working for us. So I feel very confident that we're in very good shape too.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, most of the comments, or all of the comments actually, were supportive of moving forward, except from some building owners who are worried about the question that I just asked Mr. Ferguson, and in terms of financial support and technical support. And I don't know what questions would take until September to answer so that we can move this forward, but maybe others can elaborate. I'd be ready to move this sooner, certainly not waiting until September. Maybe if you feel it needs one of our summer meetings, that's fine. But I don't know what other questions need to be answered at this point.
Well, I think Mr. Riemann indicated there were some additional questions they were going to submit that weren't here tonight. I don't know what the scope of those are. So one of the reasons I was cautious about moving something straight away. But let me just recognize Councilor Farrell and just see who else on the committee wants to be heard. Councilor Farrell?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to second Councilor Albright's suggestion about staffing. I would feel much more confident about this program if we could see exactly what staffing is going to be available to support this project. It's a huge project, and I think that there's a full-time equivalent just in trying to find out and work with the federal and state governments about what kind of support there might be for a project like this. And that kind of staffing level, I don't think looking at Boston as having 6 people and we're only 1/6 the size or whatever, that equates to one person. There are very few projects that I've ever been involved with that don't require more staff legitimately. I don't mean overstaffing just for the sake of it, but I would like to see some outline of what the staffing patterns would be for this program.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I have Councilor Danberg first, then I'll get Councilor Getz, and then Councilor Wright.
And
no, excuse me, Councilor Larry, not a member of the committee, but welcome.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I
And
have a
see
question.
Councilor Block, excuse me, I just want to acknowledge the hand is raised.
Yes.
Carry on.
In recognizing the late hour, I will be brief, and I just want to comment and ask again, Mr. Ferguson, if he is confident that the city, and I think one way that the city can really help is by organizing, sourcing out and organizing in a way that we can get this information easily out to anyone who needs it, building owners, property owners, commercial and residential alike. Sources of help, grants, rebates, information, technical support. Mr. Ferguson, is that something that you feel confident that the city can organize and get this information out, put it on our website in a place that people can actually find it and get this information out to anyone who needs it, because I think one of the legitimate fears that a building owner may have is that they may not have the time, and I can promise you they don't have the time to ferret out this information, every individual property owner on their own. So I think that if we can help by having it all there for them, that would allay the fears of that piece of it. Is that something that we can assure the public of?
We do have a website. We'll keep that up to date with all information that would be helpful to building owners. I arranged to have National Grid and Eversource testify tonight. We've been working closely with them, so closely that they were willing to come and wait all night long to testify, to explain their programs in support to us. So we have a good relationship with the utilities. They bring a lot of support, rebates, technical assistance. We will be looking into what types of federal grants or state grants will be available, where perhaps we can set up a pool of funds. So we'll be working on that. And I think what's really important to understand is we improved on the Boston system and the Cambridge system. We don't have a lot of the complications that those programs have. We've simplified. And that will affect the amount of work that building owners have to do to report, and also the amount of work that the city will have to do it to administer the program. Our ordinance is designed to be much more efficient and much less burdensome than Boston or Cambridge. So that all factors into the staffing needs for the city.
Thank you. And I also noticed in the graph that you showed us earlier that the period of compliance requirement, the implementation period, is considerably stepped down from the other communities that they were compared to. And many of these buildings are likely, many of the buildings in Newton, whether they be commercial or residential, would likely be in compliance through the 2030s and into the 2040s without doing anything. I do not see any upside to waiting very long to implementing this ordinance. If we're going to vote Berto in, then we need to do it soon, because the compliance period is not going to change. The implementation period will stay the same. I would also vote very strongly for including the residential piece in with the ordinance as we voted out, because again, the implementation period will not change. It will just, waiting a year will just give up the false idea that we are giving residential buildings another year to comply. We're not. What we need to do is get the reporting going and allow the stepped phasing to happen.
These are reasonable points to make, and we get into the conversation. I just want to make sure we get questions from Mr. Ferguson that respond to the conversation tonight, if possible. It's fine. I just want to make sure that we do that. I have Councilor Getz.
Just a quick question about the regulatory framework and the timeline for that, because I think that's important for everybody to appreciate. I also would like to know about the residential implementation and the timeline for that.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Wright.
Thank you. So I have actually been through this. First of all, for my house, my husband went and got a couple estimates for ground source heat pumps, which were between $75,000 and $95,000. I have a two-family in Boston, and I did convert over to heat pumps. It's an older house. There's a lot of additional costs people don't take in effect or take into consideration. If you have a forced hot air system, it is so much easier to do, but I did not. And so, first of all, it's an older house, and so you need to beef up the insulation. And as soon as you're taking the walls down, because it's an older house, it doesn't have the support it needs. So you need to fur up the walls, the structure, fur it up and put on new walls everywhere. And so, additional costs there, with the electrical, running all the heat ducts, things like that. I also waited until both my tenants didn't renew the lease because I didn't want to kick them out. I have naturally affordable units and I didn't want to kick someone out for that. So I waited years to do this. And then I'm out rent for 4, 6, 8 months, whatever. And I feel for Mr. Capasso is his units are much bigger and his building will never be empty at one time. So he will need to kick out tenants in order to do this. So there is, I am doing this myself, but I'm in a small level, but there's a lot of costs to residents, the renters, and then afterwards, my rent did go up to recoup the costs that I did in order to put in heat pumps. Thank you.
Councilor Leary, and then I'll go to Councilor Block online.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question to Mr. Ferguson is, I would like to find out more and ask the city to do more about resources at the state and federal level. Ms. Sangiolo had commented that on that, and I think it is important. I am sympathetic to the costs, but I want to just let this committee know that we have to pass Burdo as quickly as possible. September is too late. We need to get some of these questions answered, but we have to be bold. As one of one member of the public said, we need to lead. We're leaders. We need to lead. That's what we're here for. As one of the docketers of this item, I ran for office in 2013 because I was so terrified of climate change. I had 2 small kids at the time. Now they're 20 and 22. $93 billion in property damages in 1 year alone, a new record that Mr. Ferguson had mentioned. I have friends in Kentucky who know someone whose house has been destroyed by tornado twice in 5 years. With the displacement, managed retreat, increasing ocean temperatures, which is also terrifying because we need the ocean to be able to survive, increasing food costs, loss of arable land, reduction in wildlife and species. These are all things that are costs that are going to come up. So we can't, so these other costs are much, much more than the costs of Burdo, which I'm feeling very confident that we can manage, we can do it, we can help, we can provide resources. It's not going to be easy. No one ever said it was, but I urge this committee to pass Burdo as soon as we can. I'd like maybe to pass it at your next meeting. We get these questions answered. We have to act now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Blanc?
Thank you, Chair. It's hard not to think about the existential crisis that our society, our planet is facing. And a number of people, including Councilor Leary just now, alluding to the cost. And I've yet to hear a clear answer to who pays. I don't know who is in a position to answer that. There are references to state support, federal support, to proceed with a serious program without knowing who pays and how much it's going to cost is very troubling to me. I really think we need to get a much better handle on that. Otherwise, I just fear that this is going to backfire in some unpredictable way. We'll have all of these demands placed on us, and the carbon-based tax or the other systems, the other ideas for funding all of these remedies will just not be there. And I don't think that's a very good way to go ahead with this program. So I look forward to hearing whatever Mr. Ferguson or anybody has on that score. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. One last question that I'd like to pose to Mr. Ferguson, and that is, we've heard one example of a property in the residential space, excuse me, that really doesn't have to make many modifications for 10 plus years and still remain compliant. I'm curious to know if we have just any sense of that same level of timing to remain compliance for the remaining buildings that will be impacted by Bordeaux. I'm very supportive of this measure. I'm just curious, like several of the members here, that I want to make sure that we have our that we understand what we're putting in motion here. So if we could get any sense of how long it'll take for buildings, how long buildings remain compliant before they have to really step up to significant modifications and spend. I'd be curious to hear that. And with that said, from what I'm hearing, I believe the sense of this committee is we're motioning to hold until we have these answers, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a fair sense of the committee. I think there's certainly a sense of urgency because of the climate concerns. That's obvious, but I think that what we're trying to do is to figure out what the costs are and how they're going to be paid and who pays them, which is what I think the questions are continue to be asked. But part of the reason for this public comment period was to have an opportunity for Mr. Ferguson to be here as the representative of our sustainability program and the planning department to hear from the public and to try and figure out how we go forward from here and following up on the resolution that the council passed earlier. Councilor Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to say that I don't think that I think people's expectations should be appropriate. I don't think that we're going to know every funding source between now and 2040 of how this gets done. It's just not going to be something that Mr. Ferguson is going to be able to tell us. You know, in my last job, I traveled a lot to Africa. And about 15 years ago, when I was in Uganda, I was having conversations with some faculty and folks, and they were saying, we can't plant the same crops anymore because of climate change. And this was 15 years ago. We are very late to the party. We are all very late to the party, if you can call it a party. And there will be some unknowables. The technologies will be changing between now and 2040. It's changed a lot between 2020 and certainly now. So let's just have reasonable expectations that we will do the best we can to have the best expertise, to provide that expertise to the business owners and business community. But we may not know, no, we will not know every answer for every question even by September.
Well, we're in tension in this committee, as you all know, from prior conversations between the desire to move and the desire to understand. And as part of the process we're trying to work our way through is to strike the right balance in those actions. So any further comments from any member of the committee or members of the council who are online? If not, I would entertain a motion to hold on this item. Councilor Oliver? So moved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Sorry, was that someone no? Okay, I didn't recognize it. And abstain? Okay, the item is held. I want to thank the members of the public and also our staff and Mr. Ferguson. We've got some homework to do to try and frame the conversation so that we can bring this back to the committee and then ultimately bring it for the full council, because that's part of our role. But I want to thank everyone for their participation this evening. Okay, the hour is late. It's 11 o'clock. I want to try and at least, no, it's not 10 o'clock. Excuse me. I'm looking at the, yeah, we have two more things. Not 11 o'clock. I'm looking at that clock, not my watch. Sorry about that, folks. We're more efficient than I thought we were. Yeah, good. So we want to give the planning department a chance. I want to give you enough time. I'm worried about it too. Okay, all right. Zach, is it all right? We're gonna hold your item. So, colleagues, I've conferred with the Director of Planning, who's been very patient, and we have an item on the agenda to discuss the small business incentive, but in the interest of trying to make sure that we give it a fair hearing, at least not public hearing, but a fair discussion in committee. What I'd like to do is entertain a motion to hold that item. Councilor Oliver? So moved. All those in favor of holding, this is item 24, 24 requesting discussion and possible amendments relative to aiding small business impacted by development. This is one of those elements we're working forward. All those in favor of hold will say aye. Ayes have it. Opposed? Abstention? The ayes have it. The item is held. We want to thank the planning department for your patience. Now we have two appointments, two reappointments. This is item 23924 and 24024. I'll read the names. Reappointment of Jason Korb to the Newton Affordable Housing Trust and reappointment of Deborah Jackson to the Economic Development Commission.
I move approval.
Councilor Albright moves approval. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. I think that concludes our business. Mr. Planning Director. We just did it. We just did them. So I think we are done. I will confer with the vice chair and the staff to try and shape the agenda over the next few meetings so that we can move as many things forward as expeditiously as we can, because I'm mindful of a tension we have between getting the information, but also making sure that we take things and get them done. All right. Anything else, Ms. Norton? Are we? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So, motion to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. We're done. Thank you very much.